Welcome back, everyone, to the 15th meeting of this committee in 2021, to the evidence session with the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, MSP. I can confirm that Ms Sturgeon took the affirmation at the start of this morning's evidence session. We have three questioners left to talk about the Ministerial Code. I intend to finish this meeting at 5 o'clock. So I would ask the three questioners all to bear that in mind in their timings and to be fair to each other. I first of all have Andy Wightman.
Thanks very much, Convener. Just two, maybe three brief points. In your written submission to the committee in Annex A, on page 6, you say, this is in relationship to the 29th of March 2018 meeting, you say, Mr Aberdeen was in Parliament to see a former colleague and while there came to see me. Do you know who that former colleague was?
I do. I'm not going to name somebody, a colleague who had been a colleague of his, a civil servant, I should say, a colleague of mine who had a significant birthday. And that is what I had been told, that meant he, as well as wanting to see me, might also be a reason for him being in the building. So
two meetings that day that you, at least, that you knew?
I have no idea. I just know that he was there at the kind of birthday celebration for the colleague.
Thanks very much. Now, turn to the Ministerial Code itself. This is your version of the Ministerial Code, 2018. Must confess I hadn't read the Ministerial Code in such detail until recently. But given the significance that's attached to the independent panel, the independent advisors, and Mr Salmond told us last week, of course, that he'd established the independent panel, which seems to me to be a good idea to investigate breaches, alleged breaches of the Ministerial Code. It's curious that, and this is just a general observation on the Ministerial Code, that at 1.7, this is the only reference to referring matters to independent advisors. It's just 4 lines long. I'm just wondering whether that's appropriate because, and you might want to reflect on this, it's not directly related to the this inquiry, but is it is actually quite directly related to this inquiry because when you self-referred yourself to the independent advisor, it was set out in an inspired question on the 3rd of August 2020 by Claire Adamson that, which John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, responded to, that the self-referral was on the grounds of 422 and 423. Later on, following a letter from my colleague Alex Hamilton and others, questioning whether in fact Mr Hamilton should also look at 1C, my understanding is that Mr Hamilton came back and said indeed he was looking at it all. I'm just wondering about the propriety of having a process where someone refers themselves to an independent advisor on one ground. Should it not just be the case that as a matter of course, as a matter of routine, as a matter of policy, in fact, in the Ministerial Code, it should be a reference to an alleged breach of the code, and it's up to the independent advisor to decide which, if any, grounds have been breached.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. What I don't recall is whether, I'm certainly not aware of any deliberate change to the provision in this version of the code versus previous ones. There may be, but I'm not aware of them. But yeah, I think I can't, obviously I'm not going to try and sit here and speak for Mr Hamilton, he'll speak for himself, but my understanding of how he is doing this is, yeah, if he sees anything relevant that he thinks is engaged with the Ministerial Code, he will look at that. Just to maybe remind members that the reason originally the 422, 423, if you cast your mind back, and I don't have the official report of this sitting in front of me, but the week that the judicial review was conceded and I made the statement and set out the contacts I'd had with Alec, the First Minister's questions time that week, I think from memory it was Richard Leonard that posed these questions, was specifically on my failure to notify the meeting, and that was the request for. So that's the genesis of the referral being on these particular points. But look, I have no interest in constraining this review. I want to be able to set out the actions I've taken and get a view on my conduct in terms of the Ministerial Code. I don't want people to be able to come back afterwards and say, no, but it didn't look at the right thing. So my view is that Mr Hamilton should be completely unconstrained in anything he wants to look at or say.
And just finally, in your foreword to the Ministerial Code, you say, I will lead by example in following the letter and spirit of this code, and I expect that ministers and civil servants will do likewise. You confirm that following the report from Mr Hamilton that you will indeed lead by example in following the letter and spirit of this code in respect of any findings that he makes.
I will, in everything I do as First Minister, seek to do it appropriately and properly and by the highest standards, and it's for other people to judge that. When I've been asked this question before, will you do X? If he says, no, I know that, but I'm trying to explain. I am not trying to dodge that. I just think it is not unreasonable for me to say, let Mr Hamilton do his work and report, and then I will respond to whatever his report
No, I understand
says.
that, but you've made a commitment in the foreword here. I will lead by example in following the letter and spirit. And I'm just inviting you to agree that that's indeed what you will do.
Absolutely, I believe that. I try to do my best to do that every day in this job. It's for others to judge whether I fail, succeed or fall somewhere in between. I take very seriously the obligations and the privileges and everything that comes with this job. And for me, the office of First Minister and all that comes with that is bigger and more important than any individual incumbent of it.
Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. I have Jackie Baillie and then Margaret Mitchell, and please bear in mind the time that we have left.
I will certainly try, Convener. Can I start with the precursor meetings to the 29th of March, where Jeff Aberdeen was told by a senior member of your team about the complaints? Were you aware of those meetings?
I have answered these questions already today, Convener, to the best of my ability. I don't think I can add anything within the legal constraints I am under to what I have already said about these matters.
No, there are no legal constraints to you telling me whether you were aware of the meetings.
No, to the best of my knowledge, I wasn't.
You weren't. So a senior member of your team had meetings that you knew nothing about.
That will not be as unusual as you might think it is, Ms Baillie. I don't know what every member of my team is doing every minute of the day.
Okay, but a senior member of your team talking about complaints against the former First Minister would be quite significant, I think you would agree.
We're going back over previous ground here.
Yep.
I am not accepting the premise of your question that what you are claiming happened at a particular meeting actually happened, and that's where I'm going to start repeating myself, and we're going to go over all the same ground.
No, I'm not talking about complainers or the names of complainers. I'm talking about the fact of complaints.
Look, I was not at these meetings. The people who were at these meetings have not been heard of, and therefore I'm not going to comment on meetings that I was not party to beyond what I've said already.
No, I understand you weren't there. I understand you weren't party to those meetings. What I'm asking, I'm not asking about the complainer. What I'm asking about is, did you know that there were meetings to discuss the fact that there were complaints?
No.
You didn't? Okay. The 29th of March meeting was pre-arranged. We understand, I've checked it, it was jointly arranged by a senior member of your team along with Mr Aberdeen. It was, according to the evidence we've received, to discuss complaints. Were you aware of that in advance?
I was aware, I think I've set this out already today, I was aware that Jeff wanted to see me, that he might be in Parliament the next day, and I was given a broad indication that it was about concerns about Alex Salmond that he wanted to see me about.
Okay. A broad indication was given by a senior member of your team?
Yes.
Okay. Did the indication at any stage say that there were complaints in train?
In terms of specific complaints, that was not, I've gone through this, that was not what I was aware of at that point. I had an awareness that Jeff wanted to see me, that it was about, concerns about Alex Salmond. I've gone through what, from my recollection, Jeff then told me, and I've also gone through what happened on the 2nd of April in terms of Alex Salmond showing me the letter from the Permanent Secretary.
Okay, I'm going to come on to the 2nd of April in a minute, but I'm curious to know that, according to Jeff Aberdeen, he was coming on the 29th of March to discuss complaints. You're telling me you didn't know that that was the case?
It depends what you mean. If you mean by complaints, as in the specific complaints, I knew he was coming to see me about a general concern about Alec. I've said on the 29th of March, he shared with me that there was an issue around a harassment concern and that he wanted me to see Alec. I keep saying this not because I'm trying to be difficult here. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I have not seen Jeff Aberdeen's account. So I'm being asked to comment on something I have not directly seen.
But my understanding is Jeff Aberdeen's account was given in court under oath.
I wasn't in court.
It was widely reported.
And so what I have heard in terms of Jeff Aberdeen, I've seen something reported in the media that I believe to be an account of Jeff Aberdeen, but I don't know that for sure. And I've heard Alex Salmond's account of the 29th of March. I have not, I don't know what this committee's had from Jeff Aberdeen. I have not seen it.
Okay. But given that he gave this information on oath in court, and knowing what you know about Jeff Aberdeen, one could safely assume it's true.
Look,
Can I interrupt here? I think this is starting
to
to become inappropriate because it's referring directly to the court case. And I'm not convinced it's adding any value to this. And we have heard the First Minister many times give her view on what happened on the 29th of March.
Thank you very much, Convener. The difficulty is I'm not entirely satisfied with the responses that we've received.
I was not in court. I didn't hear the evidence
I accept that.
Jeff
I wasn't.
gave.
I wasn't
and therefore,
either.
you say Jeff said things in court on oath. I didn't hear that evidence. I said openly in my opening statement, if the accounts that I have heard attributed to Jeff are the case, then it is clear I have a different recollection to the level of detail of that discussion. And I said it openly in my opening remarks, and I've said it so far in several occasions since then.
Can I ask you about the meeting on the 2nd of April, where, according to Duncan Hamilton QC, he notes in his evidence that the only matter discussed at the meeting were the complaints against Mr Salmond. Is that correct?
At the meeting, once Alec had taken me into a private room and showed me the Permanent Secretary's letter, that was the focus of the meeting, yes.
Okay, so there was no discussion about him leaving the SNP or anything like that?
No, I said, I think, in response to somebody previously, that I had believed that that was possibly something he was going to come and discuss with me. I think I said openly, it was very clear to me very quickly in that discussion that that was not actually what he was going to suggest. So there wasn't a discussion about him considering resigning. That was one of the things, though, I thought in advance of that meeting was a possibility.
Okay. In advance of the meeting, you thought he would resign for what reason?
The way it was put to me from recollection is that this would be part of, he was being accused of something serious. What I took from it, I can't remember clearly how much of this was expressed, was that he may be thinking of resigning from the SNP as he handled this. What I took from that would be to try to protect the party from the implications of it, is what my assumption was. To be clear, though, that was not, as it turned out, what he wanted to talk to me about.
But you had to have made that assumption in advance. If you thought that he was going to stand down from the party to clear his name, you knew prior to the 2nd of April what the problem was.
I knew there was a problem, and it had been suggested to me, on what basis I don't know, that he might be, part of how he might handle this problem would be to resign from the SNP. And actually that was one of the reasons why I was being asked to, and that I agreed to meet with him. As it transpired on the 2nd of April, it was clearly not what was in his mind, and therefore not what was the subject of discussion.
Okay. But you said to Stuart McMillan that you thought he would stand down from the party to clear his name. So you needed to have known in advance of the meeting on the 2nd of April exactly what he was trying to clear his name from.
No, I think that leap of logic is quite something.
I don't think so.
I had a belief that there was a problem. He was being accused of something. I've been open about that. I had that belief going into the 2nd of April. But he sat me down on the 2nd of April and showed me the letter from the Permanent Secretary. So I had a general idea that there was something that and clear his name is my my description of this right now, which may be part of me kind of looking back on this, I'm not saying that is what Jeff said or was the terminology that was used, but there was a problem. I knew there was a problem on the 29th of March. I knew the general nature of it, and it was suggested. I don't know, or I can't recall whether Jeff said on exactly whether it was because Alec had said it or whether Jeff was just surmising that that might be something that was in his mind.
Okay. You framed a number of responses to different members of the committee as, what did I think and do as the First Minister after Alex Salmond asked me to intervene? That was entirely on the basis of it being wrong as the First Minister, but you told us, you told the Parliament that you were there as party leader. Was it just that you were there as First Minister?
I went to that meeting on the 2nd of April, and people can now read, and no doubt lots of people will have listened to my opening statement. The basis on which I agreed to the meeting on the 2nd of April was, firstly, Jeff seemed very concerned about Alex's state of mind and well-being. I was at that time his friend. I wanted to see him on that basis, and there was this sense that there was a serious issue that might affect his status in the party. So I agreed to meet on the party personal basis. Clearly what he showed me was a letter relating to a government investigation. If I had been intervening, I would have been doing so as First Minister. I would have had no locus to intervene at that stage in that procedure as party leader. I'd have been doing that as First Minister. So clearly my decision on whether or not to intervene in the way he was asking me to would have been as First Minister.
But you would have been clear by the end of the meeting, surely, that this was a government matter and not a party matter. So why then didn't you report it to the civil service?
So I've gone through this, I think, 2 or 3 times now, and
I'll do it for a 4th.
I'm going to, because it is a really important point. My decisions about notification were not based on the classification of the meeting. I didn't think, if I say it's a party meeting, I don't have to report it. And I can maybe take responsibility for giving the impression that was the case. The reason I didn't report it was because I think if I had reported it, I would have compromised the independence and the privacy, the confidentiality of the process. So that was the basis on which I took that decision. And, people can look at the relevant sections of the Ministerial Code. I doubt very much that anybody involved in writing the Ministerial Code had these particular circumstances in mind when they wrote it. That perhaps is an issue that should be dealt with in the Ministerial Code, a situation of this nature. These provisions in the Ministerial Code are to guard against undisclosed influence on decisions a minister is taking. I judged this was the opposite of that, and that I would risk the independence and the confidentiality of the process more if I intervene, if I made my knowledge known, than I would if I didn't now. That is a matter, that is absolutely a matter that James Hamilton has been asked to consider and to give his view on.
But Duncan Hamilton reported, and he was in the room, that if it comes to it, I will intervene, were the words he used. Now, sitting silent could be entirely misconstrued. I mean, I think you would accept that, because you sat silent. And my understanding of the Ministerial Code is that there are no exemptions. It doesn't say if you're likely to breach privacy or confidentiality, then don't report. It requires you to report. And actually, the breach of confidentiality was achieved at that meeting on the 2nd of April. With the benefit of hindsight, would you report something like this again immediately?
No, I'm not sure I would. And you've all spent months on this committee, so you've thought about years. Is that true? Years, yeah.
Of course it's true.
And you'll have thought about all of these things. I'm prepared to go out on a limb here and say that you probably haven't thought about these things as often and as much as I have over the period. I've agonised over every decision and every step I took in this process. I have searched my soul on this on a personal level, a political level, a government level. But on that particular decision, I did not intervene. I didn't try to influence this process. If I had picked up the phone or told the civil service I knew. My worry was that that act in itself might have been influencing the process, because suddenly you've got civil servants even just subliminally thinking, oh, what does she think we should be doing about this? And the publication requirements of that, potentially, you know, when people, as they would have done, would have said, what were you meeting Alex Salmond for? Potentially the confidentiality is breached. So that was the decision I took. James Hamilton will come to a view on whether he thinks that was right or wrong. I simply point to the fact that there are other parts of the Ministerial Code that also put responsibilities on me to respect the confidentiality of government business and respect the impartiality of civil servants. You know, before this year, I would have said this was the most difficult set of decisions I've ever had to take. I think after this year, that is probably not the case. But the personal, political, governmental nature of all of this made this a really invidious situation. I don't say that to ask for a free pass. You expect First Ministers to deal with difficult situations properly. But it really, the combination of all of this was horrendously difficult, and I tried to reach the best judgments. Maybe people decide I didn't, but that, you know, I have to be able to satisfy myself that I did the things that I thought were right at the time as well as I could, and that's what I've tried. I've thought a lot about, and I believe I'm sitting here saying I think I reached the best judgments I could.
Ms Baillie, please leave space for the Deputy.
Yeah, I am trying, but I hope we can just run over. I think we should exhaust the
well,
questions.
I have to say, I think an 8-hour meeting is pretty fair.
This goes to an issue of judgment.
Please.
You met Jeff Aberdeen on the 29th of March. You met Alex Salmond on the 2nd of April in your home. You had telephone contact with him on the 23rd of April. Messages were exchanged on the 1st of June, the 3rd of June, 7th of June you met in Aberdeen. Meetings in July, including one on the 14th of July in your home. Given what you are saying about his behaviour, why did you keep meeting him?
Yeah, I think these are reasonable questions, and you're absolutely right. This does go to issues of judgment. I think I made the right, appropriate judgments overall. Other people in the same situation as me might have done different things. That's the complexity of these situations we face. Thank you for reminding me of something I came in here after the last break meaning to do, which was correct. I think I referred to a meeting earlier on as being on the 13th of July, when in actual fact it was the 14th of July, which is set out previously. Look, I was dealing with a situation that involved somebody who was, you know, the former First Minister facing a government investigation, the former leader of my party, where this potentially has had huge implications for my party, and somebody that was a really close friend of mine that I cared about. And all of these things led me to make these decisions and try to balance them overall in a way that I thought was appropriate. We've talked a lot about 29th of March and 2nd of April. I've set out the reasons why I decided to meet on the 7th of June. I think the 14th of July, you could actually say, why did I do that? And that's the one I've said, why did I do that? And, you know, I think I know why I did it. I still had this worry that this might be about to erupt. And I was still concerned about him. And I felt, and I'm just going to say this, I still felt, despite everything, a loyalty to him. And that's why I made these decisions. And, you know, people will have to decide whether they think I was right or wrong. But I tried to, and the thing I was absolutely adamant about is that I would not, on his behalf, despite all I've just said about loyalty and friendship, I would not try to influence this process in the way he wanted me to, because I think that would have been inappropriate. And that is the touchstone on this, that I believe I was right to do. I know I've heard this afternoon different views on that, but I believe that was the right decision to make.
Finally, Convener, you said to Andrew Marr in 2018 that you had not heard any complaints about Alex Salmond. It was an unequivocal denial. Yet you've told us today about an alleged incident that you had knowledge of at Edinburgh Airport in 2017. Did you just get it wrong?
So I think I've set this out already today. In that interview, I think two things have been conflated now. I think from how I remember that interview, I was answering that question. I can't speak for Andrew Marr about the basis on which he was asking the question. I was answering the question about the government complaints. The Sky thing, yes, I've set out the suspicion and the lingering concern that left me with, but that had never, at that time materialised. I was also at that point, and this applies to the period, quite a long period after that, I was aware there were other proceedings potentially underway. I was trying on this issue not to say any more than I had to. So, look, these are all things that I accept. I accepted at 9 o'clock or after 9 when I made my initial statement. I've never been, maybe this is one of the differences between me and Alex Salmond. I've never tried to pretend I'm infallible. I've never tried to pretend I don't get things wrong. So there will be things on this that I look back, I think, and maybe I wish I'd done that better and done it differently. And if that's the case, I'm sorry about that. I tried to do these things as best I could.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, Ms Mitchell, we only have a few minutes left, so if you could be brief,
If
please.
you don't mind, this is important, Convener.
Miss Mitchell, I
It
have
is
just asked you to
important,
be
Convener.
brief. Would you please do so? I was quite clear when I felt the meeting should close. I can allow a couple of minutes leeway, but I'm not going to allow
it may
another
be that
15,
I
20
won't be able
minutes.
to put the same questions I would want to the First
Well,
Minister.
could you
see
please
what progress we
carry
make.
on instead
First
of wasting
Minister,
time?
Transparency, openness and accountability is what we established at the very beginning is essential for any government to establish trust with the electorate. And responding to the fact that no one so far has taken any responsibility at all for the catastrophic fallout from the government's complaint handling that cost almost £1 million to the taxpayer. Your response is perhaps you've been too understanding to those who made mistakes. Now that includes very highly qualified individuals with gilt-edged pensions earning what the normal Scot would deem as eye-watering salaries, who under oath have had or developed collective amnesia, have managed to forget about texts and other correspondence, have had to come back to the committee repeatedly and correct their evidence. The independence of our civil service matters, but what appears to be here, either we've got the most incompetent civil servants under the sun, some of them at the head, and that's doing such an injustice to our excellent civil service here, and that's regrettable. Or after 13 years, the independence and the lines have been blurred. Is that a possibility? Does it concern you? If you don't mind, I'll leave your questions to the end, given the constraints, your answers to the end the convener has put on me. We've also heard evidence, and this is definitely abuse of the Ministerial Code, from the former First Minister that there has been an abuse of power in leadership. And to substantiate the abuse of power allegations, your response has been, well, where is the evidence? Can you turn to the official report and just exactly the problem with providing that evidence, which our committee has also experienced. And this is what Alex Salmond says. I be here before you under the explicit threat of prosecution if I reveal evidence for which the committee has asked. Not to fulfil my oath and tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth would be contempt. But the Crown Office says it might lead to prosecution. I put it to you, First Minister, anyone looking in isolation at this process would assume that this was an inquiry process put in place by some tin pot dictatorship. Furthermore, it's deeply damaging to the proud and well-respected system of justice in Scotland, and it leads it into disrepute and open ridicule. And it's taken by the decision of the Crown to establish that Jigsaw identification is an absolute, which could possibly lead to a breach of Lady Dorian's order and a contempt of court. And this is underdeveloped. It's a concept that was rejected at Westminster in 1989 when they were drafting and implementation problems. So one thing to you now, First Minister, is you're saying what matters to you. Well, Alex Salmond laid out quite clearly what matters to him, and it should matter to everyone here, because what people are asking is if the former First Minister can find himself on the dock and in the kind of situation where he's always facing imprisonment because of what he alleges is a breach, an abuse of power, then he says, and I agree, the independent civil service matters, the independence of the Crown and officers acting in the public interest matters, acting in accordance with legal advice matters, concealing evidence from courts matters, the duty of candour of public authority matters, litigation at any cost but to assist the court in reaching the correct result and thereby improve standards in public administration matters. And above all, democratic accountability through Parliament matters. And what we found is the Parliament cannot and does not have the power to hold the Scottish Government to account. So collectively, these events and this inquiry has shone a line on what I think is a worrying deficit and a centralisation of power. And it matters when we've got a pandemic and police have got exceptional powers and you, First Minister, have got exceptional powers. And we're shortly to have an election. And if the SNP
could you come to a close, please, Ms Mitchell?
Were to be elected again, there would be no checks and balances on these powers.
Ms Mitchell, I'm going to stop you there.
Could you respond, please, First Minister?
Ms Mitchell, I'm going to stop you there because Ms Mitchell, I think some of your remarks have been inappropriate. And I think there's an awful lot in there that was your own rhetoric rather than questions.
It was in the official report.
Yes, I know, you read it out.
I'm telling the
Ms Mitchell, would you please let me as convener
Certainly.
say what I have to say? Thank you. I think some of the language you used was inappropriate, whether it was in the official report or not. I think your tone was somewhat inappropriate at times. I think it was difficult to see what questions were actually being asked. So I will ask the First Minister to respond to anything she picked up that she feels she is able to respond to.
Okay. Firstly, who wins the Scottish election is a matter for the Scottish people, nobody else. Secondly, I sit here in front of this committee today, as is my duty. You know, we've sat here for many hours. I've tried to answer all of the questions as fully as I can. But, you know, in advance of my evidence today, yesterday, I read comments from others in the Parliament that literally said it didn't matter what I said today because they had decided I was guilty. So forgive me if I think there are comments around due process and proper process that I could perhaps make in return. But I just say that and I will stop there. Let me just take a few points. The civil service made very serious mistakes here, and you know we will see what comes out of this committee's recommendations and the internal process that is underway, and if there are decisions that need to be taken as a result of that, they will be taken. I am not defending the mistakes that were made, but the civil service in Scotland acts properly and impartially at all time, and I'm going to say this very bluntly. I am privileged to have an impartial, independent civil service serving this government. And if the people of Scotland on May the 6th take a decision to have another government, that civil service will serve the new government just as professionally as and impartially as it does this one. And I think the accusations that have been made about the lack of independence or impartiality of the civil service are deeply unfair and, more importantly, unfounded, notwithstanding mistakes that are made in any organisation at times. Similarly with the Crown. The Crown acts independently of government. The Crown has, in respect of evidence shared in a criminal trial that was not disclosed, not handed over, has been operating within the law. The law passed by this Parliament that said that information shared in a criminal trial could not be. That was an absolute. There weren't exemptions, but this committee has had and has exercised the right to use Scotland Act powers to get that information. Again, I would suggest that is a system working, not a system not working. And I also think the attacks that have been made on the independence of our criminal justice system and the Crown Office are also unfair and deeply unfounded. In terms of issues around contempt of court order, that is an order that was put in place by Lady Dorian. That order has to be abided by and interpreted, and the Crown Office have a duty there to uphold the law. There are issues that have been raised in the course of this, and this Parliament in the next session may well want to look at this, about whether there should be greater privilege and immunity for this Parliament in terms of contempt of court, more akin to Westminster. I think that is a perfectly legitimate issue. But anybody who's suggesting that any of these things have happened in a way that is untoward, I think is wrong. These are examples of the law operating, which takes me, I suppose, to my final point in answer to Margaret Mitchell here. I know what Alex Salmond has said. I know what version of this Alex Salmond wants people to believe. And I know why, because I suppose when, well, I know why. But what happened here with Alex Salmond is no different to what would have happened with any individual. People came forward with complaints, first to the Scottish Government, then to the police. They did so of their own free will. And I've said before, these people, I don't know the identities of every single one of them. The police investigated those independently, as they would have done regardless of who these complaints had been about. The Crown Office, as it does every day, assesses the evidence and decided there was a case to answer, and then a court and a jury did its job. There have been mistakes made in this, and I think there is a lot of learning to be done, not partly because of the narrative around this, but I would put it to people that when it's seen in the terms of what actually happened, this is an example of the institutions of the country, the independent institutions of the country doing their job. And actually, out of this comes the message that no matter how powerful you are or were, no matter your status or connections, if you are accused of serious offences, then they will be investigated and you will have the chance to defend yourself in court. And that is how these things should work. Mistakes have been made by government, and that is undeniable. But the idea that because somebody doesn't like what happened over the past couple of years, we allow this attack to be made on the very fundamentals of our democracy, I just find deeply distressing, deeply unfair. And actually, whatever you think about me, the SNP, the Scottish Government, I think deeply injurious to the health and well-being of our democracy. And I really think all of us should think long and hard about it.
No. First Minister, can I take that? You see these as your closing remarks?
I think I probably should take those as my closing remarks.
Yes. Can I thank you then for your evidence today, for spending so long with this committee? Thank you very much. And the committee will now have a short break and reconvene virtually for a private session. This session is suspended.